very last speaker in the last session. I'll be brief. Right, well, basically I thought I'd say, I've got some handouts here, by the way. Yes, a summary of things you might need with some references on and so on. So I'm working on a thesis at the University of Winchester, and I'm attempting to draw parallels between the processes and the philosophies of individuation, according to Carl Gustav Jung, initially conceived of as a psychological technique, and theosis, obviously theosis of the Church Fathers. This is a very controversial series of parallels, clearly, as it's widely believed that theosis and individuation, according to Jung, are fundamentally different processes. The argument is that individuation looks down into the self, theosis looks up to God. However, I believe that a study of individuation, according to Jung, can enable us to comprehend better what the Fathers meant by theosis, and that individuation, and here I get rather controversial, is ultimately a repackaging of theosis in the language of secular psychology. So I'm now going to look at examples of where Jung regarded harmony between the individual and nature, specifically with the animal kingdom, to be essential to his individuation process. Now, individuation, according to Jung, is really a process of spiritual well-being. So, in outlining the similarities between theosis and individuation, I hope, therefore, that we can infer that theosis, in order to occur, requires the same conditions that are conducive to individuation. So, a few words about individuation. It was conceived both as a psychological process and as a natural process of spiritual development that, importantly, is without limit. And a few basics, and my apologies to those of you who have read in Jung. This is very simplistic model, but Jung would state that each individual has a psyche that comprises the conscious, the personal unconscious, and what he termed the collective unconscious. Now, the collective unconscious of every individual is unbounded and infinite. This is a key concept here. It's imparted to the individual via the entire evolutionary history of humankind. And indeed, one can state, and Jung believed, infinitely back from that, including right back to the origins of historical time. The collective unconscious, according to Jung, abounds with what he called the archetypes. I would say it certainly abounds with a potentiality for what Jung termed the archetypes. I don't want to get lost now in defining what he meant by archetypes, but basically, yes, we can get lost into that. But Jung discovered that ancient mythological motifs expressed in the dreams and sketches of individuals who could never have encountered them in their lives. For example, in one Dreams of an Uneducated Male, he found the ancient mythological motif of crucifixion on the sunwheel, which may be traced as far back as the Mesolithic and Paleolithic ages. So basically, to look at archetypes, an archetype might perhaps simplistically be viewed of as a vital component of a universal but personal and irreducible truth. This view is a natural one if one wants to try to envisage how the archetype might be integrated harmoniously into the conscious, which is its purpose, according to Jung. If the archetypes, from which are pervading the unconscious, are not integrated harmoniously into our conscious as they impinge upon it, the effects of the archetypes can be psychologically pathological. And one might state that there are two different ways in which the archetypes might be integrated from the collective unconscious into the conscious ego of an individual. And the way in which they are integrated would result from decisions taken with a degree of certain freedom. So the one which comprises individuation would be termed the harmonious integration of archetypes, individuation, which leads incrementally to the revelation in the ego of the true self. Or one could state, if this doesn't happen, one can get a so-called discordant integration of the archetypes into the conscious. This results in an ego imbalance, and what you would say is a disruption of the guiding link between the ego and the true self, and can result in a whole load of psychological maladies. So as the archetypes coalesce from the unconscious into the conscious, the further revealed conscious is now somewhat different from that which it was before the archetype fused and reacted with it. And this enables, in turn, the expanded conscious, if you like to put it that way, to coalesce out other unique and unseen archetypes. Jung critically asserts that individuation can only occur if the individual turns to tolerance and to love. So if one can envisage that in our lives, in our conscious perception of things, these archetypes impinge upon the edge of our consciousness, we need to reconcile ourselves with them. And this is important for the next stage of the argument. So Jung actually viewed the collective unconscious as an equal reality to everything that was conscious. He viewed the collective unconscious to be identical with nature. Therefore, nature, the natural environment, according to Jung, encompasses all the archetypes. Does it not then stand that the willful abuse of nature is thus directly counter to the process of individuation? And that, for example, deliberate cruelty to animals amounts to a rejection of the archetypes and leads to what might be termed their disharmonious integration. Now, Jung has classified psychotic behaviour as occurring as when the archetypes do not integrate harmoniously, but instead form what he terms complexes which have a degree of autonomy with them. And critically to the process of individuation, to spiritual well-being, Jung considered that the capacity to identify with animals to be an innate instinct arising from our shared evolutionary heritage. This instinct he saw as a drive toward individuation. And I quote him, "Because they are so closely akin to us and share our knowingness, I loved all warm-blooded animals who have souls like ourselves and with whom, so I thought, we have an instinctive understanding." Individuation was considered by Jung to occur in an understanding or nurturing meeting of unique and distinctive conscious entities. And I quote him again, "Even domestic animals, to whom we erroneously deny a conscience, have complexes and moral reactions." To Jung, consciousness could be viewed as the head of a gigantic million-year-old creature that has also got a body and a tail that includes the evolutionary history of all life. Jung emphasized that individuation does not remove the individual from the realm of other humans and animals, but it enlarges our connection with them, and remarked, and he remarked a number of times, no one can ever individuate on Mount Everest, which obviously it's very interesting because it's not just simply the presence of nature that's necessary for individuation, but that of animals, other living forms as well. Indeed, Jung himself found humankind to be less pious than animals, inasmuch as reflective consciousness may be a unique human attribute, but it does not imply superiority. So the individuation occurs through, also the process of individuation occurs through the manifestation of mythology that is present in Christianity and that predates Christianity, and which gives it a profound and apathetic depth. Individuation is unending in historical time and infinite in scope. These properties at least enable it to be compared with theosis. A few words about theosis, and I'm sorry I'm sure got some scholars here who know this. Theosis was moulded by Greek ideas. It is an ethical transformation that restores a likeness or homeostasis to God in the individual. Individuation is also founded upon ethics, as it can proceed only through reconciliation with the archetypes. The concept of spiritual rebirth is core to the processes of both theosis and individuation, and Jung interprets Christianity as the ultimate expression of the myth of the dying and resurrecting, meaning that a core value of God is that of transforming. Individuation is thus a psychological labelling of the central concern of Christian spirituality, the rebirth of the soul or the psyche. Both individuation and theosis are convergent experiential dimensions to this process. Theosis means neither dissolving the human into a limitless divine, nor the exclusion of the human from the divine. And as for individuation, it means the fulfillment of personal existence. Thus, in theosis, the transformation and not the dissolution of the uniqueness of the individual, enabled by Christ, hails the extratemporal reign of the realized self. For Maximus, as for Irenaeus and Clement, theosis encompasses not just the fate of the individual, but simultaneously of the whole world, as they would state it is the skopos, the goal of the entire cosmos. And Maximus is erudite in forbidding any notion that theosis destroys the uniqueness of the individual. As the Athonite monk Romilo Knežević states, one could claim that Maximus became a confessor precisely because, by defending the doctrine of the person of Christ, he safeguarded the integrity of human nature in Christ's person. Human nature is able to participate in the divine life, yet it stays distinctive. Now, I believe that individuation can allow us a fresh comprehension of theosis. Individuation demands that we respect our environment, including the animals, very specifically including the animals. By drawing parallels between individuation and theosis, we can infer, by not doing so, not respecting our environment, that is, by being deliberately cruel to animals, can neither process, neither individuation nor theosis, can proceed according to the will of the Holy Spirit. Now, I'll go through the slides in very brief summary of this. So basically, to recap, it's important to realise each individual has a psyche which is unbounded and absolutely unique. And the collective unconscious is our link. We encompass our psyche. Our psyche is us. It encompasses the collective unconscious, and this includes our entire evolutionary history, which we hold in common with the animal kingdom. And it abounds with the potentiality of these archetypes, and as Jung saw, the whole of the natural kingdom contains all the archetypes in all their animal forms. Individuation demands tolerance and love so that these archetypes, which Jung would see as the natural world, can be integrated into our conscious. This results in the right, perhaps one could argue, Christian conscious decisions made by the individual. So the natural world, basically the willful abuse of nature, deliberate cruelty of animals, abounds to a rejection of the archetypes. And to reject the archetypes means to stop or undo the individuation process. By drawing parallels between individuation and theosis, which I think are legitimate, which other scholars think are legitimate, I've got references here. To take the Orthodox view of our spiritual progression as occurring by theosis, by abusing nature, by being cruel to animals, we stunt our own spiritual development according to the models of theosis. Interestingly, theosis encompasses the fate not just me or you, but simultaneously and unavoidably of the whole world. That's a lot to get one's head around, but I won't go into it now. We've had a fascinating session earlier today about quantum mechanics, etc. But we can influence all sorts of things, including very distant nature. So, my conclusion is that to abuse any aspect of the world, specifically including its fauna and its flora, attenuates, distorts, and reverses both processes of individuation and theosis, our spiritual development. Thank you.